Okay, everybody, welcome to the Journey podcast with Jen Poulson. I have a very special guest here with me today, JJ Peterson. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
I want to just share a little story about how I came to discover you.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine kept telling me about the Storybrand podcast. Jen, you've got to listen to this. She knew I was like trying to find some marketing help and support and figure some things out. And it was kind of like one of those things, I don't have time to listen to a podcast. You know, I kept putting it off and putting it off.
Uh-huh.
And then one day she's like, you have to listen to this podcast. And I was hooked.
Oh.
And it's actually like the most consistent podcast that I listen to because you guys, as an entrepreneur, I always walk away feeling like, okay, I can keep going.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's our goal. I mean, we love it. Thank you. Because we love it and we just have a lot of fun. It's kind of like for people who haven't heard it, it's Donald Miller and myself, and we just like sit down and kind of like we're in our living room. We just said from the very beginning, we just want it to be like a conversation, and so many of the guests we have on are teaching us things. So it's just us asking us, like trying to get free advice from them and then passing it on to everybody else. So we have a lot of fun with it.
I love that. So after listening to your podcast for a while, I decided I had to go to your live workshop.
Yes.
Back when those were a thing.
Yes. When we could be together. Yes.
And
that's where we met in person. We
met in person there. I paid the VIP, thing because I wanted the full experience, and I got to sit next to Don during the lunchtime break or whatever. And my question to him was, so do you guys script that out, or are you just like shooting from the hip when you guys talk? He's like, oh yeah, totally shooting from the hip.
Total
I'm
hip.
like, And one thing that I love about you guys is that you're the same in person as you are presenting.
Yeah.
There's no difference between, that. And I love that authenticity. So
yeah, it's too hard to do anything different, I think. So
yeah, it is. I love that. So one of the things that, we do here on this podcast is actually, taking people, I want to talk to people about their journeys. I want to inspire people about their journey. And ironically enough, I was listening several weeks ago to episode 180. It's my new favorite number.
Oh, yeah?
Where you guys went through your personal mission statement.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That one. And it brought me so much clarity about me as like a coach, and like, I don't know, there's just something that really just connected for me. And you guys are all about clarity.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that the name of this podcast came from one little thing that I heard in that episode. And it's where you talked about helping people on their journey. And it didn't even occur to me until a couple days later when I was like, what am I going to call my podcast? I'm like, Journey Podcast. That's what I help people do, is go along their journey. And I love people that help people along their journey. So for you guys.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Thank you for the inspiration.
Do you know much about the Enneagram?
Just from you guys, actually.
So I'm an Enneagram 2, for those out there who understand. And 2s are people who like serve others. Like that's kind of our life mission. And it's been really interesting to discover that about myself, and even just see that. I mean, that's what I love about what I'm doing now, is it's not even about building our platform or the business platform. It's genuinely about helping other people build theirs and helping other people succeed. And granted, we know that the only way we're going to make money is if other people make money. So it's not completely altruistic, but at the same time, I think for me, it's always just so much more appealing to like get other people wins. Like when you can get, as an entrepreneur or as anybody in leadership at all, when you can get other people wins, you win. And that's kind of what we started really Storybrand with, is the idea of that I mean, you know the principles behind it, but that so many companies, when it comes to writing their own story, try to be the hero of their own story, right? They're trying to like say, we're great and I can do all these things for you and I'm the best. And we say that actually is not the story you want to tell. You want to be the guide in your customer's story. And so you are the Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda to your customers, Luke Skywalker, you know, in the story. And when I discovered that, I mean, because I, you know, for a while I used to be, I mean, we'll get into my journey, but my journey is a little crazy over the years, but I never, you know, it was always one of those things where I never fully felt comfortable promoting myself. It always felt weird, even as whether I was doing speaking or whether I was in comedy or whether I was trying to even get a job, you know, it always just feels a little weird to go in and go, all right, I have to just like put it all together and be a little arrogant almost. And when I discovered that actually I don't have to do that, when I can live my life being a guide for others, serving others and helping them succeed, that's when I can succeed. It just freed me up to be more fully myself than I probably had ever been before.
Yeah. Well, it's so powerful to take yourself out of the equation and say, hey, here's what's possible for you. And I can like show you how to do that, or I can walk with you.
One of the really fun things that we're doing right now, and I almost hesitate to talk about it because it's not mine, it's Donald Miller's. He came up with this whole concept because he's the genius kind of behind everything anyway. But one of the things that he and I have been talking about and he's really developed is this idea that in any good story, you may have heard this on the podcast even, in any good story, there are really 4 types of characters. There's the villain, the victim, the hero, and the guide. Those are the 4 types of people. And when you are a victim, now there are real victims in the world that have really obviously bad things happen to them, but most of us are not actual victims. We just take on a victim mentality.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to telling a story, the victim isn't a key player. The victim only exists in the story to make the villain look bad or the hero look good. That's it. There are not stories written about victims because true victims just stay a victim. If you transform, you can become a hero. But ultimately, if you just stay a victim, no good stories are written about somebody who stays a victim. And and in real life, victims literally just suck energy from other people. They're about trying to make some people look good and some people look bad, right? Yeah. And so that's all. When you take on a victim mentality, you'll never tell a good story with your life. You just won't. Now, villains are people who typically have a backstory of pain, like they might have been a victim at some point, a backstory of pain, but their whole goal is to revenge that pain, to cause other people pain. So you're, you know, in movies like, oh, I lost my child, so now I'm going to take yours. Like that's what a villain does. You literally, most of them have like scars, so you can actually see the physical pain that were caused in their life. So you can also choose to be that. You can choose to be a villain and like cause pain. The pain that has been caused to you can cause that for other people. But the other 2 roles, a hero is actually somebody who also has a backstory of pain, but works to redeem that pain. So they're overcoming the pain. They have a redemptive perspective on their suffering. Like if you think of any good movie, especially action movies, the hero gets beat up the entire movie. Like literally, like physically, the crap beat out of them the entire movie. But it's all working towards a purpose, and all of that becomes redemptive. Every piece of pain, when you have this like climactic scene set, when you have this idea of what a goal that you're headed for, what that climactic scene can be, every sacrifice and pain along the way becomes worth it. And that's what a true hero does, is there's somebody who really is transforming and working to win. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, they need to play that hero role for themselves even, right? So when we talk about being the guide and branding, it's a little bit different than how you live your life, right? Because I wake up and there are moments that I struggle and there are moments that I deal with pain, but I have to have a redemptive perspective on my suffering, or I might cause other people pain, or I might go into a victim mentality. And neither of those are good for the world. But a hero transforms and overcomes. And then ultimately, the highest character in any movie is the guide. They are the most powerful. They're the most wise. They're the most peaceful. The guide is the one who helps the hero win the day. right? So like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, Gandalf, Haymitch, all of these are guides. They're the smartest. And so everybody thinks they want to be the hero. But in reality, the guide is the one who's the strongest character in the movie. They're the most stable. They don't transform. They stay the same because they've already have a backstory of transformation. Yep. So in life, we can really, on any given day, I can play any of those 4 characters, right? Like I can play all 4 in one day. I can be a victim, I can be a villain, I can be a hero, and I can be a guide. But I think ultimately, like the goal in how we move forward in a journey, I think is for us to move out of that. You almost like if something bad happens to you, you are a victim. And there is a moment you have to pause and acknowledge the pain and suffering that's happening. And then you really have 2 different paths to take. You can become a villain or you can become a hero and then ultimately a guide. And for me, that has been really life-changing, just kind of reminding myself of that every day of going, all right, are you a real victim here or are you choosing to be a victim? and then what are you going to do with that pain? What are you going to do? Are you going to have a redemptive perspective on it? Are you going to help others have a redemptive perspective on their pain? Or are you going to get angry and cause more damage to other people? And I would hope that the majority of the time I would choose to be a hero and a guide than a victim and a villain.
Well, I love that because that's one thing about, I was thinking I'm going in for marketing, but really I always come away with like life coaching,
right?
Like the perspective and, oh, my awareness is heightened, oh, I can see where I've been a victim in this situation, or I can see where I've been, the guide in my business or the victim in my business, and that's a lot of the conversations that I have with my clients is getting them aware enough to get out of like that victim place so that they can shine their light,
Yeah. And I think one of the most powerful things for me when Dawn was kind of teaching and we were talking through all of this is the idea that the hero still experiences pain, but it's the perspective of the pain, of what the pain is causing or allowing. Because like even in this time, like COVID, everybody is experiencing some kind of loss and some kind of trauma. That's real. Yep. And you don't just go like, heroes aren't the kind of people who just go, I'm going to power through and make everything great. And I'm going to put a smile on my face and never be sad. And I'm so brave and so strong. Sure. But for the rest of us, it is this idea of being able to pause and acknowledge the loss that we've had in this season or in any season, but specifically now, the loss of connection with people, the loss of some of the dreams and hopes we had for our business, the loss of travel and vacation. We've lost those things. Mm-hmm. And to pause and acknowledge it and say, hey, that's hard and that sucks. That actually really, let's name it, that this is pain and this is trauma. However, what does now this allow us to do? Like I can stay in that victim mentality of this and this, when it bothers me when like I look on Facebook or Instagram and the same people every single year are like, well, so glad 2020 is done. I'm ready for 2021, or I'm so glad 2019, like they posted the past like 4 years. I'm like, 2017 was the worst year ever. Like, here's to 2018. And then it's like 2018, the worst year ever. I'm ready for 2019. And they do it every year. And I'm like, it's not the worst year ever, every single year. There are bad things that happen to all of us. But in stories, the heroes are actually pretty weak. They're not strong characters until the end of the story. They go through pain, they go through suffering, but they're continually moving forward for the betterment of their own story and the betterment of others often, right? They're like literally saving the world. They're going to destroy the asteroid that's about to hit Earth in order to save the world. And it makes everything that they've gone through along the way worth it.
Yeah, I love that. Such a great perspective and reminders. So I would love to hear how you got to this point, because obviously, I mean, it sounds like, and I know bits and pieces of your story just because I've listened to the podcast, but it definitely sounds like you've got some coaching or some like personal development training, something, because you're so good with your words that way. Like they come easily.
Well, my whole history is kind of, I'll put it very as succinctly as possible. But basically, my undergrad was in communications, and I did public relations for a couple international nonprofits. So worked like in Mexico in the slums, building homes and schools and hospitals. And then I actually became a youth pastor for a little while.
Okay.
And so I was a pastor, so there's a little bit there. And then I went into improv comedy. I actually toured and did improv comedy for about 3 years, and then kind of got tired of that and went back and got my master's. And while I was doing improv, I did some acting and writing and some other things, and then got my master's and then began teaching. So I was a professor and taught communication and leadership for a few years, and then became dean of students at the university. And so kind of worked on the mentoring side and student development. And then I created a reality show with my brothers, and that reality show got picked up by a production company. And that's what kind of moved me out of higher education. And that's ultimately how I discovered Storybrand, is because Dawn and I were friends, and I came to one of the very first workshops to brand my television show and kind of brand my new kind of, all right, I'm not in higher education anymore. I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm a consultant. How do I brand myself? How do I brand my TV show? And then came and just honestly fell in absolute love with the whole process and everything that could happen. And I didn't move out here, start working immediately. I just kind of started consulting. I was doing the TV show, doing some acting, production work in LA, and then would fly out to Nashville every other month to help with workshops. And then ultimately I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to help people figure this out. So my journey feels a little eclectic, but for me, it was just kind of always stepping into the next thing that kind of moved me forward and helped me become a little bit more of who I was. And honestly, don't feel like, I mean, I don't think we're ever done changing and growing,
I agree.
but for sure. But it genuinely felt like every other job I had before this, it was like I never hated any of my jobs. I loved my jobs, but always was kind of like, yeah, this is probably only for a couple years. And I kind of gathered some skills and things because it didn't use like my creative side, or it didn't use my teaching side, or it didn't have some of the stability that I was looking for, or it didn't involve humor, or, or didn't involve academia. Like it just kind of every job just was missing a little bit of me in it. And so I loved it and was able to contribute but it just felt like, all right, each time I'm going to try to find a little bit more of me in this process. And it wasn't until I got to Storybrand that I was like, oh, this has everything. Like it has the communication side, it has the teaching side, it has the film and television side. I can have fun doing improv on the podcast with Dawn. I love the people I work with, and I believe in what we're doing. I kind of, even in all of my other jobs, I had always said, as long as I can trust and believe in the people that I work with, and I can trust and believe in the mission we're trying to accomplish, I'll sweep floors. Like it just get me in the door, and we'll figure out where I'll go. Like it may not, even if they never ultimately had a job for me, it'd be like, okay, I'll be around for a year and I'll learn what I can, and I'll sweep floors and figure it out. But it almost became that here at Storybrand, like not sweep floors, but they didn't really have a job for me. They couldn't really afford to hire me because it was so early on in the business. Right. And Don was like, well, what if we piece these together and piece these together, and you started creating new products, and if we sell those products, I'll give you a percentage of them and all that stuff. And so I kind of wrote my own job description, came in at a very entry level because that's all the jobs that were available. Right. And then kind of built things with him, and ultimately now we do what we do.
So how long have you been with Storybrand then?
About 5 years.
5 years. Yeah, you guys have grown a lot in a short amount of time. I love that. Yeah. And I know you guys are coming out with a new book or a new program called Take Your Business to Zero to...
Like basically 0 to 10 million.
Yeah, 0 to 10 million. I'm like, how many millions was that?
Yeah. That's kind of that's really like the marketing piece of it, the story behind the whole thing. But we've launched this thing called Business Made Simple University, yes. And BMSU, and you can find that at bmsu.com or businessmadesimpleuniversity.com. And it's basically all the courses that we wish we would have had in growing our business. So there is a messaging course which walks through how to create a great story for your company, a marketing course of how to take that story and put it in emails and websites and all that stuff, a mission statement course that basically helps you clarify what's your why, and then and then there's a proposals course, how to propose together, Enneagram, some other stuff. My favorite that's coming out very soon, it's actually coming out at Thanksgiving, is it's called Hero on a Mission. It's actually called Hero on a Mission. And it's basically like a life plan and productivity course. So how to create, like, basically how to live your life like a hero on a mission. And it really helps you establish, like, it starts with imagine yourself at the end of your life and writing your obituary. And really, what do you want to be said about you? And where do you want, who do you want to be there? And what do you want to have accomplished? And then ultimately recreating those things, like re-engineering your life from 1 year out all the way till then, and getting just really specific. And it sounds a little like, oh yeah, that might be like other things I've done or heard, but it actually involves a lot of brain science and a thing that's called logotherapy that actually helps people. It's a form of therapy that helps people find meaning in their life by creating projects and a redemptive perspective on your suffering and a community of people to do it with. And basically there's a guy named Viktor Frankl who survived the Holocaust and then studied basically people in concentration camps and said, what is it about people who survived? Some people in this environment survived, some people did not. And some of it was chance, but those who wasn't chance, there were still, and he basically discovered that those who survived did three things. They had projects that were bigger than them that they were working on. They had a redemptive perspective on their suffering, and they had a community of people to live life with. And the people who actually did that, if you created a life that had those three things, you enter into what is called logotherapy, and you actually create a life of meaning. And so that's part of our life plan, is basically helping people discover that and enter that in, create that in the life that they're living so that they can have a purpose, they can have meaning, and be more productive. So that's in the course that's coming out in Thanksgiving. And so all of those courses are on BMSU. It's a subscription service, and we're just adding stuff all the time.
I actually have the BMSU subscription.
Yeah.
And I, like, for a long time, you know, I've looked around for different marketing things and help. And this, like, the Storybrand is the most clear. It's the most simple. And so I love having, like, I can go back and listen and, you know, get retrained, so to speak, you know, after being at the workshop, because for me, I need more, like, you know, and I need that constant, just like reminder and, okay, I need to bring my message back in. I did take that, that course that Donald did on the life plan. You know, when he did it as a 1-day thing. So I'm super excited it's coming back as a course, because it was a lot of information and a lot of emotional processing in, you know, 1 day. And I'm like, I need some extra time to, you know, process this.
100%. And we kind of refined it a little bit, made it even more clear. So I think you'll really like it. I'd love to hear what you think about it.
I'm so excited about that. I do want to ask you though, because like, as you were talking about all the different things you've done in your life, I'm like, I know you have ups and downs just like everyone else, you know. What has been like the driving force for you to keep going? Because I just think it's amazing that, well, first, your perspective is very optimistic, and it's like, well, I love that you didn't hate any of your jobs, but you weren't willing to stay in a job just to be in a job. Like, okay, what's next for me? I've got to learn. So what, like, tell me about that driving force.
I think it's really part of what really resonated with me when Dawn started talking about those 4 different characters of hero, victim, villain, guide, is I think from a very even young age, and I don't know where it came from, is I remember sitting down and going, you're not a victim. Like, I remember very much, because there were times in those jobs that I hated moments of those jobs. And I might have even, hate might be a too strong of a word, but hated some of the people in the job, right? So it wasn't that it was always perfect. I remember one time I had a boss a supervisor who was just literally out for me. Like it was a personal vendetta. There was some jealousy stuff of my relationship with the presidents of the company, and it just was horrible. And I even remember like literally being in tears at one point. I was so frustrated, and then stopping and going, you're not a victim. You can go find something else to do, and you actually haven't really tried to figure out how to do better here. Like you just complain about it. And I remember making a list, literally like a list of like the things that I hated about what was happening in that moment. And I started trying to figure out how I could engage or improve, just turn the knob a little bit. So for instance, I found out that this supervisor loved theater, and so did I. And so I had theater tickets, and I invited my supervisor with me to go to the theater. Just and we're not really on speaking terms at that point, to be honest. And just to break down and create some commonality there was a start. And then found out they like chicken wings, and just kind of started like little things of like, hey, I ordered chicken wings for lunch. Would you like some? And just trying to, not as a bribe or anything, but to try to start building a bridge. And then I came to the conclusion before I even started that is, even if I do all of these things and nothing changes, then I really do need to leave. I'm not going to stay miserable. But I had not actually tried to do something, created opportunity, and ultimately changed our entire relationship because I just kind of stepped up and did something different. So
that is so emotionally mature.
And it was funny. It was my first job out of college. It was
Really? So how old were you then? Like
24, 23, you know.
wow, that's impressive. Because look, most people don't ever get there.
Yeah. Well, I was miserable. I really was miserable in the moment. And I remember seeing myself going, you're not a victim. And I think that that's a big thing that has driven me always, is I just pause and go, am I a victim? And there are moments where it's like, yes, in this moment, I actually am. This is out of my control. I have been damaged by something that somebody else caused me, but what now? And how do I move that? So I think that's a big one. The other one for me too is so my parents, when I was little, my parents were missionaries in Kenya. So I grew up some of my years in Kenya. Wow. So my world perspective is just kind of bigger, has always been a little bit bigger, and the possibilities have always been like, well, yeah, I can move my family to Africa. Why can't I? My parents did that, you know. Right. And things like that, of where traveling the world or doing things that are weird or outside of other people's understanding of normal. You know, my parents also sang and like were on stage in front of hundreds and even thousands of people. And so my parents really set up kind of this world of, I don't think they never said to us, you can do anything you want to do. They just kind of did it in many ways.
Showed you.
Yeah. And brilliant. I think in all of the times in my life, so like, for instance, when I was a youth pastor, so I lived in San Diego for a little bit when I was doing the nonprofit work, and I started doing improv comedy just at a club. I met some people and auditioned and started doing it. Then I became a youth pastor. And about 4 years later, some of the people I had met came to me and said, we're starting a new group. Would you want to tour with us? And I enjoyed my job, but I knew that it wasn't for a forever job at the church. And so I was like, well, if not now, when? You know, it's kind of like I'm single. I don't have any responsibilities. I did not love living in Arizona at the time. And so I was like, why not? And I kind of then imagined what the worst case scenario could be. Like, I just was like, all right, well, worst case scenario is I end up on my parents' couch and I need to go get a job at Starbucks. Like, that's kind of right. Worst case scenario for me. And as much as I love my parents, that's still worst case. And so I just kind of imagine, what's the worst that can happen? I fail and I'm embarrassed. I mean, really, that's really the worst, is that I'm embarrassed because I told everybody I was going to be a professional comedian and it didn't happen. Right. And so I think those two things really have been, when you ask about kind of driving and maybe differentiation in my life, is I kind of, well, maybe the three things is really that I constantly am always asking myself, are you a victim? Okay, if you're not, then you need to change your attitude and you need to do something about it.
Love it.
Second was seeing my family just do and kind of experience lots of things, and knowing that it's possible. And then the third is just that idea of imagining like what the worst case scenario is. And usually it's not as bad. It's usually embarrassment, to be honest. That's
Right.
like
Ego.
that's the biggest thing. It's ego. Even when you're launching a new business, like for you to be able to say, I want to coach women and coach entrepreneurs to do their best. That takes guts. But really, like the worst that could happen is it didn't work, right? Like, oh, I'm going to launch a podcast, and it's like, okay, what's the worst that happens? It doesn't work. I'm embarrassed. I'm a little ashamed. You're going to live. You're going to be fine and go forward. But what's the best that could happen? Not only does your life
change, JJ on it. That's the best.
But like there's so many amazing things, and so I've just I think I've really lived my life. I've tried to. And again, there are definitely moments that does not happen. and there are definitely moments I throw a pity party and I'm mad and, or I've lashed out. I mean, there's definitely moments of that. But and I always try, if those are really kind of some of my values, then I try to do things that step into that. So even let's go very practically, when you talk about a big world perspective, I decided when I was 18 years old that I was going to leave the country once a year, every year. And so I lived in Southern California and in Washington and Oregon. So going to Canada or Mexico when I didn't have any money was very easy. I know that's not possible for a lot of people living in Nebraska. But for me, I could like literally drive to Mexico for the weekend and go camping at a $5 place where you could camp for the night. So at 18, I decided I would leave the country every year, and I have until this year. So we'll see if I'm going to get out of the country this year. But I was supposed to be in Berlin in April. But what I discovered kind of through that process is that, like when your world is small, you have your problems, right? And it really is your whole world. When you keep your world big, your problems are still the same size. They're just in a different perspective of things. Wow. And so I try to keep my world as big as possible. And sometimes that does mean like going to Europe and something and that, but it also means just discovering new little things. Maybe 2 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to do stained glass windows. I wanted to make stained glass because it's something I've never done before. It's something would not normally do, but it expanded my world. This year I was signed up for cheese making classes before the COVID shut down. And I wanted to learn. I'm like, why not? It just keeps my world big. I get to learn something new. I get to meet new people. You have a whole different perspective on life. Like, when you go wine tasting and you hear how wine is made, and all of a sudden you start learning about what it takes to cultivate grapes, and then like the impact that when you start learning lessons about deep roots and different things that you can apply to your own life, it's unbelievable. And so I just kind of am constantly, I try every year to go somewhere, and I try to learn something that it's not like just making bread, it's like I try to go, all right, let's figure out cross stitch. Like that's actually one thing I did this year. I'm like, I'm going to learn how to cross stitch and create. And so it usually involves some kind of creation, crafty, using my hands. But it keeps my world big and my perspective in all of that. And then, when I'm milking a goat, it's hard to really focus on your problems.
Or puts them into perspective.
Yeah, it just kind of goes, oh, I guess the world's bigger than the fact that I'm annoyed by social media right now.
Right. Oh, I love it. Your social media is great, though. You have the best videos on there.
I have fun. I like to have fun with it.
My favorite was when you had the cape on and you were singing. Now I'm going blank.
It was
Hercules, wasn't it?
Where I Belong. Yeah, it was a Hercules song, Where I Belong. Yeah.
I was like at the beginning of COVID. I
was like, I want to be out there where the crowds are, like where the crowds will roar. And I'm like, I can't be there right now.
Oh, I love it. Oh, well, gosh, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's been really fun to get to know you a little more, hear your story. When you were saying all the different things you've done, I'm like, geez, how old are you? Because you don't look that old, but it seems like you've had so many.
I have, and I'm 45, so I'm not young, but but
you're older than I thought you were.
And I know somebody last night I was just telling, and I was like, no, here's my license. I promise you, I'm 45. But I some of them was overlap, but it really, I try to embrace, I really try to embrace life. And here's one more thing I would say is that the majority of life, I'm kind of this is an improv skill that I learned is in improv. One of the rules is called yes and. So in order to keep moving a story forward, a scene forward on stage, is if you were to say to me, oh, are you riding a camel? I would go, yes, and I'm headed to the ocean, I'm headed to the gas station. I would not say, no, I'm on a horse. Because if I say no, then I'm actually stopping the scene. The scene does not move forward. The story does not move forward. And so in improv, they always say yes and. Always say yes and. And so in life, I try to be in that space a lot of like, when an opportunity comes up, even if it's super uncomfortable or not, might be stretching for me. If I have the space, I'll say yes. And like, so it's kind of that keep moving forward. And the majority of my life I try to live in that yes space, but I've also recognized that there are seasons that you have to be in the no space. Wow. That you have to say, like when I was working on my dissertation or I was writing the book, I literally had to say, I can't do yes and right now. I can't go to cheese classes. I can't be doing cross stitch. I can't be speaking or traveling a lot. I have to say no because I have to be focused. And it's okay in seasons to do that, to basically say, right now, my family and my job and my studies are it. And I'm actually have to say no to everything else right now to be focused in order to get to where I'm trying to get. And then once that season is done, you move back into a yes and mentality and you go, all right, what else can I say yes to? I'm going to say yes to new foods, new places, new travels, new people, and see where it takes me.
That's so cool. So, as we close today, what would you say? Well, there is one thing that I was hoping that you would say. Is when I was at the Storybrand workshop and you were up on stage and you make that statement, and this is what I really want, my clients and our listeners to hear is like, you make that statement about, if you hold back, what you're meant to do. I don't want to like say it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't actually.
It's like you're doing a disservice. Like you're doing a disservice to those that need you.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to that for a second? Because I love the passion you have behind that.
Yeah. There is humility does not mean that you need to make yourself smaller, ever. So I think you can be a humble person and also still be incredibly confident in what you bring to the world. So I think people mistake that. In fact, false humility to me is actually arrogance, because you're making the humility about yourself. Like you're going, oh, no, don't. I'm not, no, don't. Oh, stop, And it really becomes like it's arrogance. False humility actually is arrogance. And so being humble doesn't mean that you have to be shy about what you bring to the world as a product and like with your business and your product, but also your service. I mean, with your life, right? So like you want to step up. If you really have something that can bring light to the world, that can solve people's problems, then shrinking and being shy about that, doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve the world. It doesn't serve your clients. It doesn't serve you. And so I just think that, and so you want to stand strong in who you are as, in particular in this space, as a guide. Like if you have the ability to move people forward, to solve their problems, for those who are in that entrepreneurial space, the whole reason that you are doing your job is to help people solve their problems. And if you have the answer to solve their problems and the tools to help them solve their problems, then you shrinking does nobody any service. And you want to stand tall in who you are as a person and who you are as a brand, to be able to say, not arrogantly, but in humility, go, no, I actually do know what I'm doing. And I've been where you have been before. I felt what you are feeling. And I have the ability to help you move forward. And if you don't want to be a part of that, that's fine. But I honestly do have a way forward. So I always encourage people to stand strong in who you are, as specifically as a guide, know what you bring to the world, and offer it to people with conviction and strength. Because your false humility, it actually doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, I love that. Amazing. amazing wisdom from Dr. JJ Peterson. Okay, so how can people find, well, I would just say go to the Storybrand podcast, right? Like,
Yeah, building a
y'all are
story.
going to get an amazing education just by listening to the Storybrand podcast. But then if you're really like, for those of you who do need some help with messaging, go to the Storybrand website, go check out the Business Made Simple University. It is brilliant.
Growing a business and doesn't want to pay money to go back and get an MBA or go back to school and go into debt. It's a really great way and we're just adding more and more stuff. Like I said, of all of the tools we wish we had when we were growing a business, that's what we're trying to give to people and do it at a very low cost and high access. We want to give the good people the microphone. We want the good people to have the tools to be able to change the world. So
I love it. Well, I know that I probably wouldn't be here without, the things that I've learned and the confidence that I've gained just from, you guys have been you've been a big part of that for me. So thank you for
so happy to be part
being
of that.
out there and sharing your message. And if you guys want some great entertainment, go follow JJ on Instagram. He does the best things. All right. Thank you so much, JJ, for being here. And I look forward to another conversation.
Yes, for sure.